So we're still in quadrant one. So we're still kind of figuring out what the new problems are and a little bit more about some of the main characters. We're learning a little bit more about Rashawn. We're learning a lot more about Mama Rossi. Remember that it's only been a little more than 24 hours since this storm happened. So what happened is one day they came to town, John and Chase, and they left him to have dinner. He had dinner with them that night. He went to school with Nicole the next day. And that last book was all that day into the middle of the night until they finally got back to the farm a little more than 24 hours later. So it's now still 4:19 a.m. And one of the things I really like about this book is it switches back and forth between groups of people. So right now we have Marco, we don't know where he is, we're not hearing about him. And we have Rashawn's dad, we don't know about him or where he is. We've got the group of people that are John and Cindy and Tomas and is his name Mark, the guy who's the video camera man, are kind of all together. And then the kids have joined up with Mama Rossi, and then we don't know where the announcer guy is, right? So we're switching, it's 4:19 and we're switching back to John and Cindy. We can't stay here, Chase's father, John Masters, announced. He was looking at the display of his handheld GPS. The question is, where do we go and how do we go there from here? Here was a 2-lane country road about 3 miles from the same lake Chase's school bus had sunk into several hours earlier. Chase and his friends are lucky to have survived, John thought, if they made it to the Rossi's farm. If they're still alive. So once again, we're getting some clues that he's way more worried than we thought in the beginning. John Masters had tried to call Chase a half a dozen times since their garbled sat phone conversation more than an hour ago. There had been no answer. The eye of the storm had passed over, and by the look of things inside the 4x4 truck he was sitting in, the back end of Hurricane Emily was going to be just as bad, if not worse, than the front. Something large and heavy bounced off the hood of the truck. Maybe a lot worse, John thought. So he and Chase are kind of thinking the same thing. What was that? Mark shouted from the crew cab behind John. Tree stump, John said. I think. It felt like a meteorite. Mark was a cameraman from a local TV station in St. Petersburg, Florida. Sitting between John and his partner Tomas on the front seat was Cindy Stewart, a TV reporter who worked with Mark. John still wasn't sure why he had invited Cindy and Mark to drive along with him and Tomas into the center of the worst hurricane in U.S. history. They had already crashed and totaled one truck, and if they didn't get moving, the second truck was going to be history as well, along with its 4 occupants. Cindy looked at the photographs stuck to Tomas's dashboard. Are these your children, Tomas? Si. Tomas smiled and listed their names as he pointed at each photo. And my wife, Guadalupe. Are they here in the States? Tomas shook his gray head. Mexico. I see them one time every year. You must miss them. Si, of course. Well, why don't you bring them up here? Guadalupe, she loves our village in the mountains. Too expensive here with so many children. Tomas had been working for John Masters for more than 20 years. When John sold his part of the family construction business to his brother-in-law and hit the road to chase storms, there was no question about Tomas going with him. They were closer than brothers. John stared straight through the windshield. The path before them looked more like a stream than a road, and it was strewn with downed trees as far as he can see. Strewn is like it's all just kind of thrown out there. And that's what the storm does. It made it look like somebody just threw trees hither and yon. With the gale force winds pushing the water, it was impossible to tell which way it was flowing, but one thing was clear. The water was rising. They had to get to high ground, soon. The surge, John said. What? Mark shouted above the roaring wind. Storm surge, John clarified. Flooding. It could cause more damage than the wind. After what we've already been through, I'd prefer not to drown if that's okay with you, Mark called from his spot in the back. I'll see what I can do. John leaned over Cindy and showed his GPS to Tomas. We can try, Tomas said after he studied the map. Try what? Cindy asked. A detour. John leaned back into his seat and put his seatbelt on. The 4x4 rocked as Tomas pulled it off the road and headed into the woods. "What's he doing?" Mark shouted, struggling to get his seatbelt on as he bounced in the jump seat like a tennis ball. And remember, like or as is a simile. So he was jumping like a tennis ball. "Trying to save you from death by drowning," John said. "There's a rail line about a mile away. It should be dry and clear of downed trees. If we can reach it and get the rig up on the bed, it'll take us up to the main highway." "So now it's death by oncoming train," Mark said. "Trains don't run during a hurricane," John said, "but there are any number of other things that could kill us on the way." "Like death by flying tree stumps," Cindy said. "Yep, that's one of them," John said, and then he proceeded to give them a grim list of death by WPPs. 4:25 a.m. We're flipping back to the kids. A blast of windblown rain knocked Chase and Rashawn backward as they opened the bunkhouse door. "Window," Chase shouted, "over the sink." They hunkered down and fought their way across the room towards the opening. The window was broken. Chase grabbed a large wooden cutting board from the kitchen counter. With the wind and rain hammering their faces, it took all their strength to wedge the board into the window frame. "That will keep most of the rain out," Chase said, out of breath. Rashawn leaned against the counter and wrung the water out of her hair. "And I was just getting dry." Chase shined the flashlight at the 4 inches of water covering the floor. An armada of plastic cups and containers bobbed on the surface like little ships. An armada is a group of ships. They talked about the Spanish Armada, the Spanish military group of ships. He walked cautiously to the center of the room. "What are you doing?" Rashawn asked. Instead of answering, Chase bent down and pulled up a large frying pan by the handle. With the drain unplugged, the water level started to drop. "Cement floor," Chase said. 3-inch central drain. Shouldn't be too much damage done after it dries." "What is it with you?" Rashawn asked. "What do you mean?" "Cement floor, 3-inch drain. You sound like an architect or something. And before our bus ran off the road and sank, you sounded like you worked for FEMA." That's the Federal Emergency Management Agency. "I'm not complaining, but what kind of kid carries a satellite phone, several bottles of water, 2 headlamps, and a first aid kit to school in his backpack?" "A very strange kid," Chase admitted, and then he gave her a brief outline of what had happened to him in the past 2 years. He finished it just as the last of the water circled the drain. "I'm sorry about your mama and sister, Chase," Rashawn said. "The last couple of years of your life sound like water going down the drain." Chase smiled. "You're right. It has been kind of awful." "Your daddy really got hit by a lightning bolt?" "It went right through his shoulder, blew his boots off his feet. He was in a coma for days. When he came out of it, he looked like my father, but it was like someone else had crawled into his skin. So now he and this Tomas guy drive around the country looking for storm damage and charge people an arm and a leg to fix things and drag you along with them?" "Yep, that's MD Emergency Services." "MD like in doctor?" Chase shook his head. "MD like in Masters of Disaster." "At least your daddy has a sense of humor." "Not really," Chase said. "Not anymore, but he's a good contractor and he's taught me a lot." "So what happens to you after Emily blows through?" "Hopefully we'll stick around a while. I like it here, but my father doesn't like to spend too much time in one spot." "Your daddy sounds a lot like my daddy. I bet my daddy's worked at a dozen wildlife refuges from here to Oregon. Our last name is Stone. My mama calls him Mr. Rolling Stone." So there's a saying that a rolling stone gathers no moss. If the stone is rolling, nothing can stick to it. And so that's kind of a little saying she's using. "I think Mama likes moving around as much as he does." Rashawn glanced at the rain blowing through a gap in the window. "I just hope they have the sense to stay in out of this mess and not go out looking for me." "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" "A little brother, Randall, 2 years old." "You live on the wildlife refuge?" "Smack dab in the middle of it. The job always comes with a house." "A sturdy house?" Rashawn laughed. "Brick. I made fun of it when we moved in, called it the 3 Little Pigs house. If it's standing when this is over and my family's okay, I won't be making fun of that house anymore." "I think they'll be fine. I'm sure your parents have seen plenty of bad weather living out in the woods." Rashawn stole another glance out of the window. I don't think anybody's seen weather like this before. You're probably right, Chase agreed. He switched on the headlamp and handed it to her. Not much light. Think you can manage to find some batteries while I look for the generator? No problem, Rashawn said, slipping the headlamp over her forehead. I'll raid the cupboard for food, too, and find some rice for that satellite phone of yours. Chase shined his light around the room, which was a lot bigger and nicer than he'd expected. It was a combination kitchen recreation room. The kitchen was equipped with shiny stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, and a commercial refrigerator big enough to hang a cow in. The recreation room had a pool table, leather sofas and chairs, and two gigantic flat-screen TVs. Whoa, Rashawn said. When Mama Rossi said bunkhouse, I was thinking bunk beds, cowboys, and a pot-bellied old stove, but this is nice. It makes me want to switch my dream of becoming a biologist like my daddy and join the circus instead. Chase smiled. He'd said almost the exact same thing to Nicole the day before. He opened the door to the right of the recreation room. It led to a hallway with several doors running along the left side and another door at the end. As he walked down the hall, he tried the doors on the left and found them all locked except for one. It opened into a furnished apartment with a sitting room, a bedroom, and a bathroom. There were no personal effects, which led Chase to believe the locked doors were for apartments that were occupied. The Rossis take good care of their roughnecks, he thought. He continued down the door to the door at the end, which opened onto the workshop. Like the kitchen rec room and the apartments, it wasn't what he expected. It was almost as big as the circus barn, well equipped and immaculately clean. With the assortment of tools hanging above the long workbench, the roughnecks could repair anything. Along another wall were 3 garage doors, rattling loudly in the wind, each big enough to back a semi-trailer through. The semi-trailers are those big trailers that they use along, like Fred Meyer and those places, used to drive their goods. And so they would drive the circus animals in those big semi-trailers. The generator was in the corner along the common wall between the barn and the workshop. Chase knew the generator was on by the green light, but he couldn't hear it above the wind. He walked over and checked the gas. It was close to empty. He picked up the gas can next to it and his heart sank. It was completely dry, as were the other 2 cans he found along the wall. It took him nearly 20 minutes to discover that there wasn't a drop of gasoline in the workshop. Rashawn came in with her headlamp shining brightly again. I see you found batteries, Chase shouted above the rumbling garage doors. And food, and blankets, and pillows, and towels, and a bag of rice for that phone of yours. Good job, he said, and frowned. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, Chase said, although he knew it wouldn't be okay if he didn't find some gasoline. In a little while, it was going to be as dark inside the barn as a mine shaft. Chase looked at his watch. It was 5:01 a.m. We'll read the rest of Quadrant 1 the next time.